In your family photo, there was no longer a place for us. The moment the camera flash flickered, I understood. Mom stood at the center of the frame, with Dad and Ryan's family arranged on either side. Perfect composition. Perfect smiles. Perfect family portrait. Sophie and Noah stood behind me, bewildered. My 9-year-old daughter's small hand clutched my skirt, and my 4-year-old son whispered, "Mummy, why aren't we in the picture?" "Let's take another one," Mom's voice rang out. Waving her hands like a conductor, she directed the perfect arrangement. "Move a little closer this time." "Yes, that's perfect." We didn't exist. With each click of the photographer's shutter, something inside my heart shattered. 20 years of questions found their answers in this single moment. Why did Ryan's children get special birthday parties while mine received only practical gifts? Why did they always attend his children's school events, but were too busy for Sophie's dance recital? "This will be a wonderful photo." Mom smiled with satisfaction. I took my children's hands and quietly left the scene. As a family that doesn't appear in family photos. 3 hours earlier, the aroma of spiced cider and roasted turkey enveloped me the moment I opened my childhood home's front door. These scents should have brought comfort and nostalgia, but instead felt like a carefully orchestrated performance. The familiar hardwood floors gleamed under the chandelier's warm light, every surface polished to perfection for the gathering. But beneath those familiar holiday scents lingered something else, something that made my skin crawl. Tension. Dense as winter morning fog, suffocating and inescapable. The house felt different now, though nothing had physically changed. The same family portraits lined the hallway, pictures where my children's faces had gradually disappeared over the years, replaced by more recent shots of Ryan's boys in baseball uniforms and formal school pictures. The same antique furniture my mother had collected for decades still filled each room, each piece a symbol of the standards she claimed to uphold. In the living room, Mom stood at the head of the dining table like a general surveying her troops. Her fingers drummed an irregular rhythm on the polished mahogany surface, a nervous habit I'd noticed since childhood, though she'd never admit to being nervous about anything. The dining room had been transformed for the occasion. Her finest china gleamed under the overhead lighting, crystal glasses caught and reflected the warm glow of candles. The table setting looked like something from a magazine spread. Relatives clustered around her in small groups, exchanging hushed conversations that stopped abruptly whenever someone new entered the room. Aunt Diane held court near the fireplace, regaling Ryan's wife with stories about the good old days when family meant something. Uncle Jim nursed a beer by the window, his eyes constantly scanning the room as if looking for an escape route. The atmosphere thrummed with the kind of forced cheerfulness that comes before an execution. "Maya," Mom's voice cut through the murmur like a blade through silk. Cold as steel, calculated in tone, every syllable precisely enunciated. "We need to discuss the holiday dinner arrangements." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. My heart nearly stopped. That familiar plummeting sensation I'd felt countless times throughout my childhood whenever that particular tone emerged. I knew this voice intimately. It was the same tone she'd used when telling me I wasn't smart enough for advanced classes. The same voice that had dismissed my dreams of art school as impractical nonsense. The same cutting edge that had shaped 34 years of carefully administered emotional wounds. "Sophie and Noah won't be joining us this year," she continued, each word falling like stones into still water. The precision was surgical, every syllable carefully chosen, weighted, designed for maximum impact. "We're aiming for a more refined atmosphere. Something more appropriate for the occasion." The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. More refined. More appropriate. As if my children, my beautiful, intelligent, creative children, were somehow lacking in the basic human qualities necessary to sit at a dinner table with their own family. The irony wasn't lost on me. This from a woman who had spent the last 5 years borrowing money from credit cards she'd opened in my name. This from parents who had systematically excluded my children from family photos, birthday celebrations, and holiday gatherings while lavishing attention on Ryan's boys like they were visiting royalty. Brother Ryan's children squealed with delight in the adjacent room as Aunt Diane showered them with an endless stream of treats and small gifts. The kind of spontaneous generosity that had never once been extended to my children. 8-year-old Marcus was regaling the adults with stories from his latest soccer tournament, his voice carrying that confident tone of a child who had never once been told he was too much or too energetic. His younger brother Jake sat cross-legged on the Persian rug, carefully arranging his collection of toy cars while the adults cooed over his remarkable focus and natural organizational skills. Nobody suggested they should stay home. Nobody questioned whether they belonged at the family table. Nobody measured their worthiness based on arbitrary standards of refinement and social acceptability. My hands grew clammy with a mixture of rage and helplessness as I processed her words, my palms slick with the kind of nervous sweat that had plagued me through every confrontation with my parents since childhood. "What exactly do you mean by refined, Mom?" I managed to ask, though my voice came out smaller than I intended, carrying echoes of the uncertain little girl who had spent decades trying to decode the unspoken rules of acceptance in this house. Mom released one of her signature sighs, that particular exhalation that had become the soundtrack to my childhood disappointments. It was a sound I'd cataloged and analyzed over 34 years. A breath that somehow managed to convey infinite patience stretched to its breaking point. Disappointment so profound it bordered on despair. And a weariness that suggested explaining basic concepts to someone so fundamentally lacking in understanding was an exhausting burden she bore with martyr-like grace. "Your children are rather energetic, Maya," she said, the words wrapped in cotton but sharp as razors underneath. "Last time, Noah knocked over that antique vase in the hallway, the Waterford crystal that belonged to your grandmother. And Sophie was running through the house like it was a playground, completely disrupting the flow of conversation. People couldn't hear themselves think. The memory came flooding back with painful clarity. Noah, barely 4 years old, had been chasing a ball that had rolled down the hallway when he'd accidentally bumped into the console table. The vase, worth maybe $200 at most, had wobbled and fallen. I'd immediately dropped to my knees to help clean up the pieces, profusely apologizing while Noah stood frozen in terror, his little face crumpled with the kind of shame that no child should ever have to experience. "He's 4 years old," I interrupted, my voice trembling with the effort of keeping my composure. "4-year-olds have accidents sometimes." He apologized immediately, and we offered to replace the vase. We even researched the exact pattern online and were prepared to order a replacement. But that hadn't been enough. It was never enough. Because the real issue wasn't the vase, wasn't Noah's natural 4-year-old energy, wasn't Sophie's excited laughter echoing through the halls. The real issue was that my children existed in a space where they would always be measured against Ryan's offspring and found wanting. Every childhood transgression would be cataloged and stored as evidence. Evidence of their fundamental unsuitability for inclusion in the family narrative. I retreated to the kitchen, my childhood sanctuary, the one room in the house where I'd always felt safest. The familiar layout hadn't changed. The same cream-colored cabinets with their faux antique hardware. The same granite countertops that my mother had spent months researching and selecting 15 years ago. The same breakfast nook where I'd eaten countless silent meals, while my parents discussed their disappointment in my life choices and voices just loud enough for me to hear. My hands shook as I gripped my phone, knuckles turning white with the force of my grip. The device felt like a lifeline, my only connection to a world where my children were valued and loved unconditionally, where their laughter was music instead of noise, where their energy was seen as joy rather than disruption. Through the partially open door that separated the kitchen from the dining room, I could hear the low murmur of voices, my parents' voices speaking in the hushed tones reserved for discussions they didn't want me to overhear, but somehow always managed to conduct within my earshot. The positioning felt deliberate. as if they wanted me to catch fragments of their conversation, wanted me to understand exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. "It's really for Maya's own good," Mom was saying to Dad, her voice carrying that particular mixture of condescension and manufactured concern that had defined so many conversations about my life. "She needs to understand that maintaining certain standards is important. It's about teaching her children proper behavior, helping them understand their place in society. Ryan's family has always known how to respect our traditions and expectations. Those boys are so well behaved, so respectful. They understand the value of quiet conversation and appropriate conduct." "That's absolutely right," Dad agreed, his voice taking on that eager to please tone he always adopted when backing up Mom's latest pronouncement. "Remember last Christmas? We had such a peaceful, civilized evening. Not a single disruption. Not one moment where we had to worry about broken items or inappropriate noise levels." The boys sat quietly, engaged in meaningful conversation with the adults, showed genuine interest in family history. It was the kind of holiday gathering that makes you proud to be part of this family. The words hit me like physical blows, each phrase a carefully aimed dart. The message was clear. My children were inherently flawed, inherently less valuable than their cousins. They were inherently unworthy of the same love and acceptance that was freely given to Ryan's boys. A flood of memories crashed over me with devastating clarity, each recollection a fresh wound that time had never quite healed. Last Christmas, the holiday Dad was now holding up as the gold standard of family gatherings. I remembered watching Sophie, then 8 years old, standing in the center of the living room with her dark curls bouncing as she proudly demonstrated a new dance routine she'd learned in her after-school program. Her face had been radiant with excitement as she moved through the steps, her small body expressing pure joy and confidence. But my parents had barely looked up from their phones, offering only distracted murmurs of acknowledgement before returning to their devices. Mom had even made a comment about saving the performance for home and learning when it's appropriate to seek attention. Sophie's face had fallen, her joy deflating like a punctured balloon as she slowly returned to her seat, the light in her eyes dimmed by the realization that her excitement wasn't welcome here. Then, less than an hour later, Ryan's eldest son Marcus had decided to show off the exact same dance routine he'd apparently learned from Sophie during their brief interaction earlier in the evening. The reaction had been immediate and overwhelming. Thunderous applause, delighted laughter, requests for an encore. Dad had pulled out his phone to record the performance. Mom had clapped with genuine enthusiasm, and Aunt Diane had proclaimed it absolutely adorable and so creative. The double standard had been so blatant, so cruel, that I'd had to excuse myself to the bathroom to compose myself before returning to the gathering. But that was just one incident in a lifetime of subtle and not so subtle messages about where my children stood in the family hierarchy. There was Noah's preschool graduation, an event I'd been planning to attend with both my parents for weeks. I'd sent them the date, confirmed their availability, even adjusted the time to accommodate Dad's work schedule. The morning of the ceremony, I'd received a terse text message, "Too busy today." Something unexpected came up at work. Maybe next time. That same week, the exact same week, they had somehow found time to attend every single one of Ryan's son's Little League games. This was a tournament that required them to drive 45 minutes each way and sit on uncomfortable bleacher seats for hours in the blazing sun. I'd seen the Facebook photos. My parents beaming with pride in matching team t-shirts they'd specially ordered. Dad keeping a detailed scorecard. Mom manning the snack booth like it was her calling in life. The favoritism played like a highlight reel in my mind, each memory more painful than the last. Lavish birthday parties for Ryan's children featuring hired entertainers, professionally decorated venues, and guest lists that read like a who's who of the extended family and social circle. Meanwhile, Sophie and Noah received modest celebrations in our backyard, pleasant enough affairs, but the contrast was impossible to ignore when the photos from both events inevitably appeared on the same social media feeds. There were the school events where my parents claimed front row seats for Ryan's boys' performances, but somehow never managed to show up for Sophie's piano recitals or Noah's art exhibitions. The Christmas mornings where Ryan's children received elaborate, expensive gifts that had clearly been selected with thought and care, while my children opened practical items that felt more like obligations fulfilled than expressions of love. Most painful of all was the constant scrutiny. The way my children's every action was analyzed and critiqued while Ryan's boys could do no wrong. When Marcus interrupted adult conversations or spoke out of turn, it was precocious and shows real leadership potential. When Sophie did the same thing, it was attention-seeking behavior that needed to be corrected before it becomes a problem. When Jake had a meltdown over not getting his way, it was dismissed as normal child development. But Noah's rare emotional outbursts were treated as evidence of serious behavioral issues that reflected poorly on my parenting skills. The double standard extended beyond behavior into every aspect of their existence. Ryan's children were encouraged to pursue expensive hobbies and interests, Marcus's golf lessons, Jake's private art classes. The family ski trips that coincidentally always seemed to fall during school vacation weeks when my children might have been available to join. Meanwhile, when I'd mentioned Sophie's interest in joining the local theater group, Mom had immediately launched into a lecture about the importance of practical skills and not filling children's heads with unrealistic dreams. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway like a beacon of sanity in the chaos, his familiar presence immediately grounding me in a way that nothing else could. He didn't speak, didn't need to after 15 years of marriage and countless similar scenes in this house. His eyes met mine across the kitchen, and I saw my own fury reflected there, mixed with the kind of protective anger that comes from watching someone you love being systematically dismantled by people who should be offering support and unconditional love. How many late-night conversations had we shared about this exact situation? How many times had Ethan gently suggested that my parents' behavior crossed the line from merely difficult into something darker and more destructive? He'd been documenting their actions for years, not out of malice, but out of a growing concern that the pattern of emotional manipulation and financial exploitation was escalating to dangerous levels. Maya, Mom's voice broke through my thoughts. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed. You're being rather dramatic about this. It's just one dinner. I met her gaze, truly seeing her for the first time. The carefully styled hair. The expensive sweater bought with money that wasn't hers. The practiced expression of concern that never quite reached her eyes. No, I said, my voice steadier than expected. If my children aren't welcome, neither am I. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped. If you can't understand why I understand perfectly. I stood up, my chair scraping against the tile. I understand that you've never seen my children as equals to Ryan's. I understand that you've made them feel less than worthy their entire lives. And I understand that I'm done letting you hurt them. Mom's face hardened. If that's how you feel, perhaps it's best if you do stay home. I left the kitchen, my heels clicking against the hardwood as I walked down the long corridor. Each step felt heavier than the last as years of manipulation and control pressed down on me. At the end of the hall, I stopped at the large window overlooking the darkened street. Street lights cast long shadows across the lawn, and my reflection stared back at me, jaw set, shoulders straight. My phone felt heavy in my hand. There was evidence there. Years of texts, emails, bank statements. Proof of every manipulation, every financial abuse, every emotional betrayal. The question wasn't whether to use it, but how. That evening, my office chair creaked as I leaned closer to the laptop screen, squinting at the latest bank statement. The numbers blurred together until I blinked, and suddenly they snapped into horrible focus. My heart stopped. A $3,000 charge. The figure glowed accusingly on my screen as I scrolled through transaction after transaction. Designer boutiques, high-end restaurants, furniture stores. Each purchase bore my mother's distinctive pattern, the same stores she'd bragged about shopping at for years. No, I whispered. but the evidence didn't disappear. My hands shook as I clicked through to older statements. There it was, a clear trail of unauthorized charges stretching back months, years. Each one a betrayal. Each one a knife in my back. I hit print. The whir of the machine unnaturally loud in the stillness of my home office. While the pages emerged, I created a new folder on my desktop, labeled it Evidence. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I punched in my mother's number. My printed evidence sat beside me like a silent witness. 1 ring. 2. 3. Maya. Her voice carried that familiar note of mild irritation, as if I was interrupting something important. What is it now? The credit card, Mom. My voice trembled despite my effort to keep it steady. $93,000. A dismissive laugh crackled through the speaker. Oh, that. It's just a card, sweetheart. You know your father, and I have some expenses. Expenses. The word came out sharp enough to cut. You used my card without permission for years. Don't be dramatic, she sighed. The sound so practiced it might as well be scripted. This is what family does. We support each other. Your brother Ryan understands that. Ryan. I gripped the phone tighter. What does Ryan have to do with this? Well, he agrees that families should stick together. He's always been so good about helping us out financially. Her tone turned honeyed, poisonous. Of course, he has those baseball league fees for the boys. My free hand balled into a fist as memories flashed through my mind. Ryan's new car last year. The renovation on his house. The lavish parties for his kids. All while my parents racked up debt in my name. This ends now, I told her, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm canceling the card. Maya Elizabeth. Her voice turned sharp. Don't you dare. I ended the call, my hand shaking as I lowered the phone. The room spun slightly as I processed what had just happened, what I'd just discovered. The next day, 20 minutes later, we sat in our favorite cafe with 2 of my closest friends, Sarah and Jamie. The familiar scent of roasted beans surrounded us as I showed them the evidence on my tablet. Classic financial abuse, Sarah said softly. She'd survived her own toxic family dynamic years ago. You have to shut this down, Maya. Jamie nodded, her expression fierce. We've got your back. Whatever you need. That evening, I sat at my desk again, my hand hovering over my phone. The credit card app was open, the cancel card button waiting for my touch. This small act of defiance would change everything. I pressed it. The confirmation screen appeared, and I felt a surge of something like power. It was a small victory, but it was mine. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I continued organizing the evidence. Screenshots, bank statements, emails. Each file got carefully labeled, dated, annotated. A notification popped up on my phone, a newly discovered folder titled Secrets from an Anonymous Sender. My breath caught as I opened it. Voice messages, texts, hidden correspondence between my parents discussing their plans to maintain control over my finances, to keep Sophie and Noah at arm's length while lavishing attention on Ryan's children. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding against my ribs. These messages weren't just evidence of financial abuse. They were proof of every suspicion I'd ever had about my family's true intentions. The question now was what to do with all of it. The moment of decision, my phone buzzed for the 10th time today. Another notification from Mom's latest Facebook post. Sometimes the most ungrateful children are the ones you've sacrificed everything for. Comments rolled in. Sympathetic responses from family friends who'd known me since childhood. Now tisk-sking at my supposed selfishness. Turn it off, Ethan said quietly, reaching for my phone. His fingers brushed mine, steady and warm. You don't need to watch this in real time. I need to know what they're saying. My voice came out harder than intended. They're trying to destroy my reputation, Ethan. The whole town's eating it up. The familiar weight settled in my chest, that mixture of rage and helplessness I'd carried since childhood. But this time, something else rose with it. Something that felt like steel in my spine. I'm done, I said, standing so abruptly my chair scraped against the floor. I'm done letting them control the narrative. I grabbed my purse and car keys. Ethan didn't ask where I was going. He already knew. The drive to my parents' house took 7 minutes. Each turn of the wheel felt like clicking another piece into place. The family dinner was in full swing when I arrived. Through the dining room window, I saw them arranged around the table like a Norman Rockwell painting. Mom at the head, Dad to her right, Ryan and his perfect family filling out the rest of the seats. The empty chairs where my children should be stood like accusations. The door wasn't locked. It never was during family gatherings. Keeping up appearances mattered more than security in this house. The sound of laughter and clinking cutlery cut off as I stepped into the dining room. Maya, Mom's voice carried that familiar note of manufactured concern. We weren't expecting. No, you weren't. My voice came out clear and steady. You weren't expecting me to show up uninvited. You weren't expecting me to stop playing by your rules. You weren't expecting me to find my voice. Ryan started to stand, but I held up my hand. For once, he actually stopped. I've spent my entire life trying to earn your love. The words I'd rehearsed 1,000 times in my head flowed naturally now. I've watched you lavish attention on Ryan's children while treating mine like inconveniences. I've let you manipulate me, shame me, and use me for your own gain. But that ends today. Mom's face hardened. If you're going to cause a scene? I laughed, and the sound surprised even me. You want to talk about scenes? Like the scene you're making on social media? The carefully crafted posts painting me as an ungrateful daughter? The whisper campaign you're running through the neighborhood? I pulled out my phone, opening the folder where I'd documented everything. Should we talk about the $93,000 in credit card charges? The loans you never repaid? The emotional blackmail? Because I have receipts for all of it. The color drained from Mom's face. Across the table, Ryan's wife suddenly became very interested in her plate. Dad's hand trembled as he reached for his water glass. You can't. Mom started, but her voice lacked its usual authority. I can. I will. And I am. Each word felt like breaking another link in the chains they'd wrapped around me. You tried to turn the community against me? Fine. See how they react to the truth. Every manipulation, every lie, every dollar you stole, all of it documented and ready to share. The silence that followed felt like a physical presence in the room. In that moment, I saw them clearly, saw them all. Mom's perfectly styled hair couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. Dad's expensive watch looked like a shackle on his wrist. Ryan's practiced expression of concern had cracked, revealing the panic underneath. I turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. Oh, and Mom, next time you want to post about family values, remember, screenshots last forever. The truth revealed. My hands shook as I spread the documents across the community center's conference table. Bank statements fanned out like playing cards, each one a piece of damning evidence against my parents. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows on the papers, making the numbers seem to leap off the page. $93,000 in unauthorized charges. Meticulously documented. What exactly are we looking at here, Maya? Aunt Diane's voice wavered as she leaned forward, squinting at the statements. I drew in a steadying breath. Every single charge my parents made on credit cards they opened in my name. My finger traced a line of transactions. Designer clothes, luxury vacations, even Ryan's children's private school tuition. The assembled family members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Mom's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide how her face had gone ashen. Dad stared at his hands, suddenly fascinated by his wedding ring. Ryan stood in the corner, arms crossed, jaw clenched. That's not. Mom started, but I cut her off by playing the first voicemail recording on my phone. Her own voice filled the room. Maya, honey, you know we needed that card for emergencies. What kind of daughter refuses to help her parents after everything we've done for you? I tapped to the next recording and the next. Each message dripped with manipulation, guilt, demands. The room grew heavier with each revelation. Mom surged to her feet, hands fluttering like trapped birds. You're taking everything out of context. We've always supported you, always. Always? My voice remained steady even as my pulse raced. Always made me feel less than Ryan's children? I pulled up text messages on the projector screen. Mom canceling plans with Sophie and Noah while posting photos at Ryan's kids' events. Dad promising to attend dance recitals, then making excuses. Constant criticism of my parenting while praising Ryan's. Abuse? Mom's voice rose sharply. How dare you use that word? Everything we've done has been out of love. Ethan stepped forward, placing a stack of additional papers on the table. Love doesn't max out credit cards in your daughter's name, Linda. His quiet voice carried more weight than Mom's protests. Love doesn't play favorites with grandchildren. My friend Sarah moved to stand beside me, adding her own folder to the evidence pile. I've witnessed it for years. The manipulation, the guilt trips, the financial exploitation. I slid the final document across the table, a copy of the police report I'd filed that morning, documenting the identity theft and credit card fraud. The room went silent. Even Ryan's constant fidgeting stopped. Maya, Mom whispered, her composure finally cracking. You wouldn't really press charges against your own parents? I gathered my documents with steady hands, the sound sharp in the stunned silence. That's exactly what you never understood, Mom. This isn't about what I would or wouldn't do. This is about what you did. What you chose every time you favored Ryan's family. Every time you manipulated me. Every time you stole from me. The question isn't what I'm willing to do. The question is, what were you willing to do to your own daughter? As I walked toward the door, the room erupted in murmurs behind me. Mom's protests mixed with Dad's pleading tone and Ryan's accusations. But for the first time in my life, their voices didn't have the power to make me turn back. New dawn 6 months later, the evening sun warms my face as I settle into the white wicker chair on our new porch. My fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of chamomile tea. Sophie's laughter rings clear across our yard as she chases Noah through the sprinkler, their wet footprints marking temporary paths on the concrete. Water droplets catch the light, creating tiny rainbows that dance around my children like protective spirits. Ethan leans against the porch railing, his quiet presence as steady as always. When he catches my eye, his smile holds all the understanding we've built through years of fighting this battle together. He doesn't need to say anything. We both know how far we've come. Mom, Sophie calls out, her dark curls plastered to her forehead. Watch this. She executes a perfect cartwheel through the spray, landing with a gymnast's grace. Noah immediately tries to copy her, resulting in more of a cheerful tumble. My chest tightens, but not from anxiety this time. This is fullness, an abundance of something I never felt in my parents' presence. Pride, joy, unconditional love. The sprinkler's gentle hiss reminds me of that final confrontation 6 months ago. Standing on a different porch, listening to my mother's attempts at manipulation falling like water against stone. I'd returned there one last time to collect the remaining pieces of my past. The weathered wood had creaked under my feet, just as it always had. But I was no longer the same woman who once trembled at that sound. I remember touching the smooth surface of my phone as I finally deleted their numbers, not in anger, not in revenge, but with the quiet certainty of someone closing a book they never need to read again. The wind rustles through our maple trees, trees we planted ourselves when we bought this house. Roots growing deep into soil that belongs to us alone. A cardinal lands on the branch nearest to me, its red feathers bright against the green leaves. It reminds me of the journal entry I wrote last night. Freedom isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of choice. I've been writing a lot lately. Sometimes about the past, but more often about the future. About the weekly support group I started for others trapped in toxic family dynamics. About the look in a young mother's eyes last Thursday when she realized she wasn't alone. About the text message I received yesterday, You gave me the courage to say no to them for the first time. Ethan moves to sit beside me, the chair creaking softly under his weight. Penny for your thoughts, he asks, his voice carrying that gentle curiosity that first drew me to him. I was thinking about Emily, I say, referring to the newest member of our support group. The way she described her mother's financial manipulation, it was like hearing my own story played back. He nods, understanding flowing between us like an electric current. You gave her hope today. I saw it in her face when you shared your journey. The sun dips lower, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of orange and purple. Noah runs up to the porch, his small feet pattering against the steps. Mama, I'm hungry, he announces, water dripping from his eyelashes. I scoop him up, not caring that his wet clothes soak into my shirt. Sophie joins us, wrapping her arms around my waist, and I breathe in the clean scent of their damp hair. This is what freedom smells like: laundry detergent, wet grass, and the lingering traces of sunblock. Standing here with my children's hearts beating against mine and Ethan's steady presence beside me, I feel the truth of it all settle into my bones. We aren't just survivors of what was done to us. We're architects of what comes next. The sky continues its color transformation, each shade more vibrant than the last. My eyes sting with tears that have nothing to do with sadness. These are tears of recognition, of finally seeing the woman I've become, the mother I choose to be, the life we're building brick by brick, moment by moment, choice by choice. I turn my gaze from my family to you, whoever you are reading these words. Maybe you see yourself in my story. Maybe you're standing at the edge of your own decision, wondering if freedom is worth the price. I'll tell you what I wish someone had told me. What does true freedom mean to you? And more importantly, what would you sacrifice to reclaim it? A smile spreads across my face, not the careful, measured expression I once wore like armor, but something real and fierce and completely my own. I already know my answer. Do you?